Greetings, Fringe family. Welcome back to The Bird. I'm Colibri, aka The Bird, and the Bee, live coming at you from the Love Shack.
Welcome one, welcome all. We have, as you saw in our last video, we survived the little Texas ice storm that we had.
Yeah, I slept in the living room in front of the box stove for about 4 nights. All of us iced in together. It's a little gorgeous, intense, cold.
Texas snow.
Yeah.
Snow, the cold's really not that bad. It's just everything, like it's raining ice and then or it'll rain and then it just turns into ice and it's just very treacherous. But so yeah, I read 2 books while we were stuck inside. Nobody was working.
Yes, we read a lot. I
read
a lot too.
I read The Warrior Ethos by Steven Pressfield, and then The Psychic Power of Animals. Learned a lot. Found respect for it. Was written in the 60s and 70s, I think. So I know there's way more research, but
yeah,
I have way more found respect for animals and their intelligence, and then just things beyond our 5 senses, what we call supernatural, which is just very natural, as it turns out.
It's very natural.
I don't know if you want to dive right into all that, but
I would love that. I love the theme of this because you were reading this book and because you shared this story that hopefully you're about to share. I delved back into tapping into psychic ability and extrasensorial ability and really creating a clear channel with that again, something that I had kind of drifted away from for a while. So thank you, reconnecting. I've been following the breadcrumbs, and that was one of the major breadcrumbs, was you initiating that.
yeah, that's like the big takeaway is how, just like I said, just how natural it is, and how, like we did a little experiment. I guess I'll start off with this. Wasn't in the book, but it inspired us because there's this clairvoyant terrier I want to talk about, but it just got us experimenting on ourselves. And we did this I don't know, maybe it was like a year ago, but where we would we had a deck of cards and the girls were like, all right, let's just guess what the first one. And the first time I did it, I just closed my eyes. I'm like, because it's really the trick is that you're not thinking, you're not like trying to logic. I was just close my eyes. I'm like, what do I see? Then I remember it was dark and I kind of saw some like red little shapes and they kind of turned into diamonds, and and I saw 2 rows of 3. So I was like 6 of diamonds, and then they flipped the card over. They're like, "Oh my god!" And it was the first try. It was a 6 of diamonds, and then we kept doing it. And I remember I was like, then afterwards I'd be kind of like 1 card behind. It'd be like similar. There was one time I was like, I think the 3rd time I got it right, but I was like, I guessed it. They flipped a card. It was wrong, and then the next one was that one. But
right. So using my intuition, just the knowing and seeing how. Well, we're both kind of future seers. We both are kind of visionaries in our own rights, especially as Aquarius and Sagittarius. And so what I was noticing was the pattern, and this was last year as well, and we play a lot of psychic games together, but I was noticing, especially with the cards with B, is that you would see either the suit or the number of the following card. It wasn't the card, the initial card, but the next card he would get. So I was noticing that, yeah, your future vision is really kind of attuned right now more than anything.
Yeah, and then the eldest, she did it the other day, and she first try she did it, got it, nailed it.
Suit and number.
And then the other time she was guessing. She was like, or she was using logic. She was like, okay, we haven't really pulled a couple spades, so spade,
Right, she was playing the numbers, the percentages.
And that's what I learned in this book is just how. Well, they're talking about how animals communicate like this. There's like these animal whisperers, but how they could, obviously, because animals don't use our vocabulary or our language, so they kind of like send images. Although in certain cases, there's these 2 like animal linguists, I guess, but they just have these like innate. I think they were saying everybody had it, but these innate abilities to just go up to animals and then just hear what they like. Just tell them. They just listen. Like one was there was a horse that like there's all these vets looking at it, had like a lame back leg, they called it, and like all these doctors couldn't figure it out, and then the guy went up to, they called him in, and the horse spoke to him without words, and then the horse told him, oh, I backed into a board that was sticking out and there's a splinter in my spine. And then sure enough, that he told the doctors that, and the doctors looked, and yeah, there was a splinter in his spine, and that was like what was affecting him. And all kinds of one. There's one lady, she brought this. She had a party of like 16 people brought their pets, and like they all waited in their car one by one, and like they would just come. The animals would come in. We talked to them, and like one was like, oh, sometimes the dog. I forget what kind of dog it was, but the dog gets set. Her favorite spot was like under the sink in a bathroom, and then they get upset when this is what everything he was telling them, and the owners would later confirm. And he was like, the dog was like, and the little girl goes in there and cries under the sink and shuts the door, so I can't go in there, and I get sad when I can't go in there, and she's sad, and then of course he told the owners that, and she's like, yeah, that happened. That's exactly what happens, and
So confirmations.
yeah, and he all kinds of stuff. I can't even remember
Mhm.
all of them, but yeah, it's pretty wild.
Right. Well, it's so natural though, like you were speaking to, especially ushering in this new energy of 2023 and noticing and knowing that come March, there's this big boom of energy on the horizon as far as people tapping into their own intuitive skills and extra powers, so to speak. That some things that we would call supernatural or psychic ability, and people attuning to those things more and
There's a
more.
boom of that. Is that what you said?
Yeah, energetically, it's in a lot of the readings right now. But I wanted to get to Missy, your doggo.
Well, first, I wanted to speak on these other ones about just speaking on intelligence, about how we have this view of what intelligence is, and like we come up with these tests, and if animals can't do it, then they're like dumb or smart. But like one, it was talking about these elephants that they would stick mud in these bells around their neck so people would hear them, and they'd stick mud in them to make the bells stop ringing, and then they would go and break into the banana fields at night so they can just no one would detect them. They would just, I mean, that's pretty smart.
I love this.
They're aware of that and the
yeah.
sound and everything. And then one was talking about these dolphins that it was just talking about observing them hunt. Like they would chase an eel into a hole, and the eel would go into a hole, and then another dolphin would go and grab a fish that had like a poison sting and like shove them in the hole, and then force the eel out. And then one would be ready for the eel on the other side, and just smart stuff. And I wanted to mention that one thing about that animal guy, because he was talking about how the animals don't use our words, and he was talking about how one dog said he loved chasing, quote, stinking cats. And then the guy, he's like, stinking cats. And like, oh, that's obviously a skunk. And then the owner's like, yeah, he's like, he loves chasing skunks. And then, but just showing that they don't use our words. But yeah, this Missy dog, Missie the Clairvoyant Terrier is like my new favorite animal. I'm like so blown away by this dog. I took so many notes on it, but she was, I think she was in the 60s, and she was on like the radio and like on local TV there. I tried to find some clips, but I couldn't. But they were talking about, like, she would call, like, okay, well, first she had like an unusual birth. Like she had like the litter was born, and then the mom was having issues, and then she had to go into like surgery because she had like this lump in her chest, and it turned out that the dog, there was like a puppy that was like stuck way up in there, and they had to get her out.
In her rib cage.
Yeah, like high up in there, and then which I didn't even know that was a thing. Like,
I had a cat like that.
isn't like the uterus? I don't know how it goes beyond it, but
Mhm.
but yeah, and then they were talking about, so the dog had like special care from it when it was young, and then it was never even around its brothers and sisters, and then this one lady took care of her, and she was always more fond of people than dogs, and she said this is how her first clairvoyant ability started. Was she was just walking the dog Missy, and then there's like a mom coming toward them with a little baby in the stroller, and the owner was talking to the baby and the mom, and she's like, oh, how old are you? And like the kid was shy, and then the mom was like, say 3 to the baby, and then Missy the dog barked 3 times, and she was like, I'm like, oh, that's what a coincidence, that's pretty weird. And then and that was like the first kind of sign, and all this other stuff happened where she I don't remember the exact sequence, but she knew what time it was. She would bark. They figure out how to communicate. Like she would bark 3 times for yes, 2 for no. Like they would, here, let me pull up my notes because I don't want to miss this.
I had a cat when I was little named Lefty. She was my mom's favorite cat, white. She had the front right leg missing, so she walked on her left leg. And she had an identical kitten that was stuck up in her rib cage. pretty much the
I
same
wonder if she
way.
had abilities. Okay, so it says this is what I took down. She could like you'd simple stuff starting out. You'd hold up your fingers. She'd bark how many fingers you're holding up, and then if you do like say you did 5, and then you did like another one like 7, like 2, and then she would bark 7, so she could do math. And they said she could even do it, speak words in different languages, but
You
she
said 5 different languages, correct?
4, yeah, and
4?
they only tested for 4 of them, but and the let's see, this blew my mind. They said she could tell the difference between words, like what are they called, onomatopoeias? Like
Right.
they would I don't I remember how they did the spelling test, but I think they said, is this Mary? Like they would say the word Mary as in a
She did
name,
syllables, right? Or the numbers.
Mary,
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah, that's what it was. She would just bark the amount of words, like how many letters are in Mary as in her name. There's 4, and like how many words are in Mary as in Merry Christmas, and then there's those 5, and then what about when people are getting married? And she could just knew the difference of those, so that's amazing. And she she would go meet strangers, and then she could just she knew their address for numbers, like say your number is like 450, Oak Lane. Like she would bark 4 times, pause, bark 5, and then 0 is a bad example. I don't know how she did 0, but and then like just knew people's social security numbers, like people's like she would call obviously people were skeptical, and so like they were at this one vet, and they're like, there's no way. And then so he's like, what's something that you don't know, like you never give anybody information? And so they were like, oh, I never give anyone my private home phone number. And then they asked the dog, what's his phone number? And then she just barked it correctly, and the doctor was like, oh my, this is like crazy. And there's even letters from like senators that were talking about how she did the same thing.
Right, the
And
confirmation. She guessed his social security number.
yeah,
Nice.
and one is at a party, she could tell how many coins were in a purse, like how many beans were in a bag, and like people didn't know, but they'd count them out
Oh, I didn't
afterwards.
know
But
that part.
and then
So she did party tricks.
yeah, exactly. This is what got us back on the card thing. Was that there was one where they were at a party, and they had a deck of cards, and of course the dog couldn't see it, but nobody and people couldn't even see it. They'd pick a card, and then she would say like she would bark the amount that are on the card. Like it was 7 of clubs, and then they did some type of. And they would say, "Is it a club? Is it a spade?" And she'd be quiet, and then she'd bark until it was the right one. But she did that for the whole deck, like got every single deck card right on the deck, and it was like just mind-boggling, like how for people to be like, "Oh,
Wow.
coincidence or just tricks," but the lady said she never trained them. She did shit to strangers. She guessed, and she could predict the future. Like she guessed presidential election, like more like predicted presidential elections. She specifically predicted the day the New York transit strike would end in like the 70s.
Didn't she predict the World Series as well?
That's next.
I'm surprised they didn't use her for gambling.
I know. I'm like, dude, go play the lottery, dude. I'm like, put this dog to work. But yeah, it said she predicted 9 months in advance the day the World Series would end and the score.
Wow.
She predicted her radio host baby birthday. Oh, this one's crazy. This woman had 2 stillborn babies, and then she was worried about if she was gonna have the baby. So they talked to the dog, and she's like, in 9 months it was gonna be October, and she's like, is the baby gonna be born in October? And she barked no, and so the lady got all worried, and then so she after talking, they said that she told her it was gonna be born in September on the 28th, and then she corrected she got the date right and the birth and the sex right, which is
And the weight, right,
the weight,
of the
yeah.
baby.
And it was a preemie too, so it was like 7 pounds. But
That's extraordinary. Just the numbers. So,
this one is she predicted the cost to the dollar of the construction of a large educational building. I'm like, okay. She predicted one person's death, but the guy was dying, but the owner didn't like doing that, and the guy just kept pressing her, and she predicted like 25 months or something, and then followed up, and that was accurate. And then
that's a bold question.
and it got weird because and you can bring this up to this other video that we saw more recently, but they were talking about how like it was kind of weird because like the dog was kind of almost like more human than a dog, like a small child in a dog's body. Like she said she would make a fuss when they go shopping when there's something she wanted. She loved pink things, and they say dogs can't really see pink, but she loved pink
But
stuff.
she could.
And And so she would bark at something, and then she said she shoplifted 2 times. Like she put 2 things in the owner's bag when she wasn't looking, and then the dog denied it afterwards. She's like, "No, I didn't put that in there." And
That sounds like the eldest.
she's like,
She
"Oh
was
yeah."
an infant. Yeah.
And it says, um, when visitors came, she would come over. She would bring her piggy bank out and put it in front of them and paw at the coin hole, and then and it fit dimes in there, and like because she would use the dimes to buy ice cream from this guy down the street, and she said if you put anything else in there, she would just take the piggy bank and run. And then she said she ate the ice cream like she put it in her paws, like to hold it in her paws and lick it. She said if you put the ice cream in her dog pan, she wouldn't touch it. She's like, no, I'm not a freaking dog. And then, oh yeah, this one, just going back to the letter from a congressman who said she guessed it, knew his social security number, street address, and phone number. And then last thing about her I have is she predicted her own death. Because she knew the time, like she could predict the time. And then so the owner would ask her what time it was, but she kept saying 8 p.m. She kept barking 8. And then the owner was like, that's weird. And then she did it like 7 times that day. And then at 8 p.m., they said she choked on a piece of food and died. And then it was, and then they said they went into her room, the clock in her room, like it was like a little toy clock, said 8 p.m. on there. Like that's a little premonition there. But yeah, it's just amazing. Like there's just so much stuff for people to be like, rational thinking, like A leads to B, like correlation kind of thing. Like how do you explain that? Just that there's like non-linear kind of thinking and seeing.
So didn't she liked to wear pink. She liked to wear little girls' clothing
pink
too.
Pajamas.
She had pink pajamas, a pink dress, things like that. So this got me thinking about reincarnation and the way that she was born and under such distress. I feel like the soul entered and maybe didn't get wiped, and possibly the receiving antenna was in the brain maybe wired a certain way. There's all these factors and variables that could play into that would create that certain ability, right? Pressure on the brain in the rib cage, or
yeah, she had like epilepsy.
She had blue eyes, right? She had blue eyes.
It said cobalt blue eyes, and like she was smaller, but she looked different than other terriers that like her. But yeah, it was like a weird, like stark blue.
She also used to chant like a prayer when she got out of her bed.
Yeah, that one. It was. I know that one is not very like premonition-y, but in terms of like reincarnation stuff, yeah, I was saying like it would. I don't know how you pronounce it, what the author was going for, but it said AUM, like and like an alphabet, like, and she would like stretch and make those sounds, and the author is like correlating that to like like Hindu type of stretching, like yoga essentially. But
yes, and this is in the 60s and 70s. And so what I was thinking, initially, my first thought was, I'd like to look up the birth or death records within a couple of months from whenever the dog was born, to see if there were any children with those sort of, good at math, loved pink, loved to eat only ice cream, was possibly from an Indian or sort of like Hindu background, and then see if there was anything, cross-checking that, if there was anything correlating to that, because I really feel like she was a reincarnate.
I'll go more into it, but there's this guy, he died in 2007, it said, but Dr. Ian Stevenson, and he always studied was reincarnation, and he was talking about these people who, specifically birthmarks and like deformities and stuff, but he was talking about, I'm trying to remember one example, like, it was like a kid who had like a face, like half his face was deformed, and the kid said he'd always have dreams, like, especially when he was younger, about getting like a shotgun, past life of getting like a shotgun blast in half of his face. And like a kid, and I remember thinking that coming to this on my own, like I have a birthmark right here, and then a slight thing on the inside, and he's talking about how that like, I'm like, did I get like? I remember thinking like, I think I got shot, as ironic as that I like to hunt now, but I think I got shot in the leg, and like it was like a thing, but he was talking about all these other things like that. But one specific thing was this: there's this girl in Sri Lanka. It said a toddler one day overheard her mother mentioning the name of an obscure town, Kataragama, that the girl had never been to. The girl informed the mother that she had drowned there when her dumb, mentally challenged brother pushed her in the river, that she had a bald father named Herath, who sold flowers in a market near the Buddhist stupa, that she lived in a house that had a glass window in the roof, a skylight, dogs in the backyard that were tied up and fed meat, and the house was next door to a big Hindu temple, outside of which people smashed coconuts on the ground. Stevenson was able to confirm later that there was indeed a flower vendor in Kataragama who ran a small stall near Buddhist stupa, whose 2-year-old daughter had drowned in the river while the girl played with her mentally challenged brother. The man lived in a house where the neighbors threw meat to the dogs tied up in their backyard, and it was adjacent to the main temple where the devotees practiced their religious ritual of smashing coconuts on the ground. The little girl did get a few items wrong, however. For instance, the dead girl's dad wasn't bald, but her grandfather and uncle were. His name wasn't Harath. That was the name, rather, of the dead girl's cousin. Otherwise, everything else is, pretty accurate. And
But that makes it all the more believable because memory isn't incredibly accurate that way, right? We get
the fact that it's a
wires
little
crossed, it's a little skewed. It actually makes it that much more.
Because if it was exactly right, it'd be a little more like, I don't know. But there's thousands of stuff he did like that, and he kind of, not that he was kind of going to disprove stuff, but he'd go into it to try to, he's like looking at the stuff that isn't right, but like hundreds of thousands of cases of stuff like this.
So speaking to this, the little one, when she started walking incredibly early, talking incredibly early. She wanted to do everything on her own so fast, so quickly. As an infant, she stopped breastfeeding at a year-old. She unlatched, and she said, "I'm done." Started walking, started talking, and our first true conversation we ever had was about her telling me that she needed to go back to China, that she was royalty from China. And that's where she was from, and she
sure acted like it.
And that she needed to go back, and that she appreciated being born, but that she needed to go home. And she would. I have all these details written down in a journal from then that I need to find. They're buried somewhere in a keepsake box, but.
And now she's ironically huge into Asian culture, like
huge into Asian culture. She's on her way to becoming a Taekwondo master in I'm sure a year or so. She's just incredibly dedicated. She just started leadership and everything, but she draws and creates animes and
does taekwondo.
But when she was a baby, she just had all these attachments to China. She knew exactly where China was. I hadn't taught her anything about China yet. I'm just amazed by her all the time, but still speaking to reincarnation. Have you ever heard of Matias De Stefano?
Mm-mm.
So he claims that he can remember all of his past lives and that he's tapped into all the memory of the multiple, all of them since his first incarnation. And that I was watching him on Aubrey Marcus podcast. He's on there if you guys want to tap into that, go down that rabbit hole. He's a very interesting person. But I think listen up, French family, I think B was probably imprisoned and eaten by rats or mice
in North Korea.
And I think it's imprinted in his DNA, because we think his grandmother might have been North Korean. Actually, we can't get proof of that, but it reminded me of this temple called Karni Mata Temple. It's known as Kabas, or the little children, they call the rats Kabas. Because
it's in India, right?
It's in India. It's in Dashnuk, India. Forgive me. Correct me, Roshni, if I'm pronouncing any of this incorrectly. But what they give there's thousands and thousands of rats in this temple. And they go to worship the rats because they believe that they're reincarnates of lost, of dead children, or their deceased children, but namely more of a certain family.
Let me guess, they're starving and they don't eat them. I heard rat tastes pretty good.
Well, they don't eat them, but what they do is at the end of the day, before the temple closes, certain more dedicated people, I would say, they will drink the milk from the bowls that the rats have been feeding from, turds and all. So I thought you would really appreciate that because he has a definite aversion to rodents.
And I've heard that Yomi Park, that I think she's got some type of PR push behind her, but she, you know, that North Korean defector lady that she was talking about,
Oh
like
yeah,
they would
she's gorgeous.
they would eat rats, and they would she was, it's so vague since I remember listening to her, but she was talking about being in like in a hospital or some kind of state, some place where, you know, she'd see people dying and the rats would come and eat their eyes, and then, you know, eat the people, and then people would eat the rats because they, you know, because they you know, they're fucking hungry. So it's like
Meat's meat, man. Can I read this little according to legend? So, according to the legend, the rat temple near Buccaneer dates back to the 1400s when Karni Mata, an incarnation of the god Durga, asked the death god Yoma to reincarnate the son of a grieving storyteller. When death refused to help, Karni Mata promised that all male storytellers, members of the Karan or Charan caste, would be reincarnated as rats in her temple. When they die as rats, they are once more reincarnated as members of the Dapavats family, and Karni Mata's descendants are known. While the origins of rat worship in India go back to the 15th century, the current temple, with its intricate marble panels and solid silver carvings, was built in the early 1900s to honor Karni Mata and her furry reincarnated devotees. The temple has around 20,000 rats in residence, where they are fed by the members of the extended Dapavats family. There are 513 Dapavats families and devotees to Karni Mata. Though most of the temple devotees work at the temple in shifts based on the lunar cycle, some families live in the temple permanently, taking care of the rats and sweeping the floor of excrement and food crumbs. The rats, known as kabas or little children, are fed grains, milk, and coconut shells from the large metal bowls. Water the rats drink is considered holy, and eating the rats' leftovers is said to bring good fortune to those making the pilgrimage to the temple.
talk about being low on in the caste system. You're like, yikes.
I find this fascinating and beautiful. The devotees
No, I
have
respect rats, but
another reason to keep the rats safe and happy. According to the temple laws, if one of the rats is accidentally killed, it must be replaced with a rat made of silver or gold.
oh my, you gotta work for 20 years to like save up to replace this rat.
They're devoted, deeply devoted.
Dude, speaking, I respect them, but that reminded me of in that book, Power of Psychic Animals, was talking about, you know, how animals, they like obviously they predict, you know, they can tell when like a storm's coming, they can tell when like disaster, like
Yes.
I can think of some, like one little quick thing was talking about goldfish in Japan, like why they have them on their bowls, because like when they start like getting frantic in their bowls, that they can tell there's like an earthquake coming, and that's a sign for everyone to get out of the building. But on the rat part, it was talking, I think this was in like Brooklyn, it was talking about, this happened multiple times at this building where the owner would die or somebody would die in there, and like it was like infested with mice and rats, and then like whenever the person would die, all the rats would leave the building. Like it was visible, you could see them all like just filing out, and then like I think it was, and then the person died, and then sure enough, like I don't remember the details, but then they would come back in like once things were settled, but they can definitely pick up on like the energies and like death and stuff, and just
Oh, of course. Yeah, definitely. There's so many things like that, right? Animals before rain, farm animals before rain, horses.
yeah, I'm trying. Man, I wish I could remember all. But yeah, it was like they're like crabs. They, you know, like a tsunami and shit. They like just fucking
They migrate. Yeah.
migrate, and like I was talking about birds in an earthquake in like Spain. They like fly way out of off the peninsula, and then like you know come back afterwards. But
Well, this comes to my point
horses
that I read
too.
in your book. Yeah, I was just saying horses. They
They
definitely
go crazy,
can predict
and they're like pens.
they
And
get
then,
very restless. I remember that when I was little. I grew up with a lot of horses, and right before a storm, they get real restless. There was this in your book, this excerpt that I wanted to read by Carl Eric Fitzilius and Scholander call for a change in man's attitudes towards the animal kingdom in their closing remarks in their book Smarter Than Man. Even people who understand the doctrine of evolution intellectually have a hard time feeling strongly enough that man is a part of the living earth. Man needs something to shake him to his roots, to impress him deeply with the fact that he does not own the earth. this something which might give man the humility he needs could be a greater knowledge of the other large-brained animals. And I think immediately of dolphins, because their brain is like, holy crap, 5 times the size of ours.
Yeah, speaking of a dolphin, I remember it was talking about there's like a certain dolphins. It's been done multiple times, but like in captivity, where like say like a fucking SeaWorld type of thing, like a dolphin failed to do a trick or something, and then so they'd like get a dolphin who's never done it, but put it. It was basically saying that how they can learn through observation.
Yes.
And like a dolphin that's never done the trick just fills in, does the trick that it's been watching the
Mhm.
other dolphins do, and I mean, just the whole book was talking about, like, at least the beginning of it was talking about intelligence, and if animals designed tests for intelligence, like we would fucking probably look like laughable, like if they would and I've heard this with like when people go like what hunter gatherer people, like when like the white Western people go in and they're like, man, how do you like what? And the guy's like, how do you build a shelter? Like, how do you find food here? Like, for intelligence, that's pretty basic intelligence, like how to survive. And like
Yeah.
and we're like, I don't even know where to start. But they're like, oh, you do this. This tree's for that. You eat this thing, and
Right, it saddens me that on a whole, animals really do a lot of work to communicate with us, and they're communicating with us all the time. Birds go silent in the woods. They go silent here. We know a predator is around. There's just ways, and that's not even direct communication, but if you're attuned to animal life and you know that you're not separate from which...
Yeah, I like what that was saying about how the intellectual part, like that's great, but that does detach us from a certain things. Like another example I can think of is it was talking about this family who moved from Ohio to Oregon, and then they had a dog with them, and then they'd never been to Oregon, and they stopped in like Indiana, and they stretched their legs, let the dog out, and the dog ran away. And after an exhaustive search, they couldn't find the dog, so they're like, all right, let's just keep going, and then they made it to Oregon. And then 3 months later, the fucking dog showed up at the front door, and like he'd never been there, didn't know the route they took, but he fucking, picked up on something, knew where they were, like, and
Yes.
the whole thing about dogs, animals knowing their owners are on the way, because I think there's like it's like that whole Rupert Sheldrake, like that morphic resonance field idea, where like, you put out a thought, and it's like a non-physical. It's like it was in the book, The Sense of Being Stared At, like like when you're staring at someone like their back, and we all have that feeling of knowing when someone's staring at, and you look, and sure enough, I'm like eye contact with them, and because he was saying like your gaze sends something out, like you're literally sending something out, like when you look at the stars, you're literally
when you
like
stare into the
shooting
void, the
something
void
there, but
stares back at you.
yeah, so there's some non-physical thing going on. So when someone's like, I'm going home now, and then you think of home, that the dogs can pick up on that kind of thing.
It reminds me of, you remember the movie Homeward Bound when we were kids?
I do, but I don't remember it.
It was based on that true story about the dogs finding their way home back.
Really?
When their people moved.
Got separated? Oh.
Yeah.
What is the
Love
main?
that movie.
I remember I can see the VHS cover. Was there like a
It's like
beagle?
a golden retriever and 2 other dogs. There's like a kind of
I'm thinking of Fox and the Hound.
Fox and the Hound.
Those are my favorite movies.
but speaking still to ability, and where your attention goes, energy grows. Where your attention grows or focus goes, energy grows. And that's a huge deal right now. Being called upon with me and with a lot of others that are tuned in to, like I was saying, the cosmic energies that are coming into this year. I feel there's a lot of power coming our way, and everything's moving so fast, so quickly. Growth and just so much movement around us all aligning and getting into position and seeking our roles and upgrading and really attuning to what that is, what our role is in this new earth that is being birthed. And so it's not an accident that you were just looking at the bookshelf and then attuned to this book, and then it started this whole, it was the catalyst for this whole journey.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't know what compelled me to. I mean, I read that Pressfield book pretty quick, and then
Well, it's like a
Yeah,
more
it's a
like a
quick read, but
booklet,
it's like a
yeah.
toilet kind of book. But
But I wanted to ask you, um, right? You said you're not sure what pulled you
yeah, I
to
just
that
wanted
book.
to. Honestly, I've been wanting to read a novel lately. I have to like find a good novel to read, but just fiction. But I don't know when I saw that because I'd read it
Mm,
before and like didn't really hook me. I don't know why, but once I got it
yeah.
into the Mita stuff, I was like, dude, this is fucking crazy, dude.
If you guys ever have book suggestions, oh, please leave them in the comments. That would be delicious. I'd love to hear what you guys are reading or anything that you think that we might resonate with.
Yeah, the last novel I really like because when I get a book, I read like a novel. Like I don't read them often, but when I do, I'm like I just like consume it. Like the last one I read
Right.
was Running the Light by Sam Talent. He's a comedian. He's like an amazing writer, but it was just about this like down and out kind of comedian. But it like I flew through it.
Hey. Right
Yeah,
there.
we saw him open for Tim Dillon.
Yeah, I just saw him in a short as well.
But yeah, I don't know. It was a dude that Pressfield book, that Warrior Ethos. You know, just talking about. I know you didn't fully agree with it, but it was just I just remember it was kind of talking about like the stoic nature of a lot of like Spartans and stuff. But it talked about different cultures.
Yes.
But one thing that sticks out that blew me away was how much they could endure like pain and just not showing outward expressions of pain. And it was talking about how they didn't feed the kids. Like they went from like 0 to 7, they could live with their moms, and then 7 afterwards they'd go through this crazy Spartan training where they like
Right.
live in like they'd have to make their own bed like out of reeds, but they couldn't cut it, and
They
they'd
had
have
to
to
hunt and
like
gather
sleep
their
on the
own food.
floor. Yeah, they
Mm-hmm.
barely fed them, and they were supposed to steal food but like not get caught. And one kid was stole a fox, and then he got caught midway, and he had the fox on him, and he like put his I don't know if they had jackets back then, but his cloak over it, and
Mm-hmm.
they're asking him about if he stole it, and then the kid was like said no, I don't have a fox, and then the fox was getting anxious in his jacket, and then he started eating his stomach, and then and the kid was not showing any signs of it, and they kept eating, and they
He's
said
eating his belly button.
yeah, and then he
Yeah.
just he bled out after that just from
Right.
but just the fucking crazy
I
stoicness
find
of
some
it.
things really fascinating about the Spartans and the way that they lived, including, well, beginning with their diet mainly consisted of lentils and bull's blood.
Yeah, it was like
Bowls of
pig
it
blood meal.
every day. It would be lentils and animal blood, mainly bull's blood. And then they lived so minimally and sparsely, and the women actually had a lot more rights than any other women of the era and in the land, the
Especially
surrounding,
the moms.
especially the mothers. They were able to own land, which was unheard of. They were able to manage their own land, manage their own money. They weren't sold off by their fathers. They were able to pick their own spouses for themselves. They had a lot of freedom, especially because the men were always off to war. So they had to know that they had to be secure in the home and on the land while the men were gone.
Yeah, it was the famous 300. It's hard to remember because I think in the book he was talking about he wrote like a fictional thing on the 300 Thermopylae story, but because he said he got so much feedback from this that he said that when Leonidas would take the 300 men, he specifically picked ones whose wives were like the kind of strongest, and like they would, and the
Mm-hmm.
whole ethos of them is like there's like a famous story of like like a messenger coming back from war, and she met a mom on a path, and she's like he was talking to her, he's like, I have bad news, or bad and good news, like one of your sons died in battle, or no, but two of your sons fled, and then one I'm butchering it, but she was saying like one fled from battle and like ran away, and she was like that's not
One
my
was a
son.
deserter.
Yeah, she's like that's
Yeah.
not my son anymore. He fucking ran away. And then another story is that like how two of her different mom, two of them her sons were running back from a battle, and then she was like lifted up her dress, and she's like, this is where you guys belong, calling them pussies because they're like you guys need to come back in here.
Oh
But
my God, Spartans trolling their children. That's kind of funny,
oh
actually, because
oh
they're like beyond stoicism. It's
yeah,
just intense the
yeah,
way that they
because
live.
they're a warrior cult, like warriors in a warrior culture. Because most people,
Yes.
like the Marines, anything like that. Now it's like
Mm-hmm.
warriors in a civilian culture. Like they're talking about, like the Greeks, they were a civilian culture, and you're talking about the food that's what I was getting to.
Yeah.
The food aspect was they like one of the kings, whatever, Spartans went to Greece, and like so they had this elaborate feast and put all these cakes and fancy stuff together, and then and the king, the Spartan guy was messing with them because he asked them, like, give us your best food, and then their cooks cook stuff, and it was just gruel, like pig blood meal and like stuff, and they're like
Right.
it was making a point of like this whole elaborateness and like that how soft they were, and
But it creates discipline of the people. I mean, the children were.
yeah, I mean they're a little extreme, but yeah, there's definitely stuff to be taken from that for sure. Like,
But I appreciate the self-discipline aspect of all of that. I
Yeah, me
really
too.
do. And then having a regimented diet as well. Just they really believed that the less material dependency that you had, the closer you could be to your own warrior ethos. Like the more that you stay inside of that, and they needed that because that was everything that they were. So I feel that it's extremism, of course, but it's such fascinating history,
yeah,
right? I'm not into extremism, but it's fun to learn about. Those times were really intense in Greece and
I don't think I finished my point on the 300 part, and did I say this about how they would specifically pick the ones where the wives were like happy for them to go and die, like if the women would have like freaked out, like, no, like
Right, it's
all
the
our men are
women's
dying, then
mindset,
that would
right.
ruin the whole society and culture. So they had
Mhm.
to specifically pick the ones that were like, yes, like I want, it's
Yeah.
I'm proud that they die in battle, and like because they all knew it was like a suicide mission. But
Right. I think that ties back into it's been debunked, but there was that myth that they would only keep the strong infants that were handpicked, and then they would throw the the weak infants off the side of a
No,
cliff, and that just wasn't true.
no, I'm pretty sure that I just read that, and he was talking about that, how true that was.
Yeah, I just read that was actually debunked. We can circle back to that another time, see if I can find that literature again, or that article again that I read that from.
Okay.
But they were dependent upon the mindset of the mother, and how strong she was, and they would pick those offspring of the strongest women to be trained. So all the children lived. It's just that they would pick the 300, or they would pick the special unit from the really stoic mothers that were willing to sacrifice their children for the sake of battle.
Yeah, and another facet that was interesting, like a great takeaway, was like talking about just how there's not people like in war talk about this, how there's no other bond like that when you're by your like brothers or sisters, and y'all are like willing to die for each other, and like the whole point is to show, like, it was talking about one guy got his arm chopped off and then was still like, he's like, I can't be seen weak by my brothers, and still doing stuff to like help them out, even though he's like majorly fucked up. But how that's like,
Yeah.
it's a weird, because it's kind of brainwashing where you like because they're not about the individual, it's about the group. So it's like, it's not really about whether you survive, it's like, what can I do to keep the group alive? So it's like this crazy bond, like I can't imagine, it's like a crazy bond of like like,
Well,
we're in this together. And
it reminds me of parenting moments or mothering moments where I've had to stay, or I am in those times of crisis where my mind just goes to a really still place because I need to be the buoy in the storm so that everyone else can stay calm and detached, so that we can focus on the task at hand. Like whenever Izzy had her low blood sugar seizure last year, her blood sugar was 20 and she was seizing, and we all just banded together and got her through it and kind of nursed her back to health. But I was really shaken by that. It still was something up until recently that I had to work through, not wake up all hours of the night to go check on her and make sure she was okay, because that happened at like 2 a.m. one evening, something we're used to, having to check her blood sugar every 2 hours. But yeah, during that, trying to keep my cool while my baby was dying was very intense.
Yeah, that's what I say this a lot, but I feel like calmness is like one of the most overrated attributes. Like being, because it's one thing you could prepare for everything, but if you're freaking out in the moment and like you're letting your body anxiety and your emotions take over, like that's when you have to like, that's when it's the most valuable, is like being able to like stay calm and, you know, in the fire.
So true. Walk through the flames together.
Yeah, very overrated. Yeah, and you talking about like all this mom stuff. I was like thinking of like, reminding me of like mom, you know, in the Call of Action when moms can like flip over cars and shit just to get to their babies and stuff, and like,
Ooh, there's so many things at play within that, though. This flood and rush of endorphins and things, and just sheer will, right? Like human will is so, the human will to live, the human will to survive. But even beyond that, I think the human will to thrive in a lot of social climates right now. I'm really proud of everyone thriving and not just in survival mode, because there's so much bullshit spinning around everywhere, distracting us from the truth, from our own intuitive truth. Speaking of which, there was one more point that I had with the whole reincarnation pathway, and then also just incarnation. Like, do you remember the indigo children?
yeah, I remember the term, but
Right. Have you ever been called an indigo child?
yeah,
Yeah, me too. My friend Dana, specifically.
I feel like it's like the woo-woo version of like Gen Z, Gen X. It's like indigo, like crystal children, like, yeah, like a
Right.
because it's like a generational type of thing, like
So
rainbow children.
right. So I've also been called a rainbow child, but and so is Izzy. She's called a rainbow child quite often, but it was a term coined by Nancy Ann Tapp in the 1970s, who claimed that she'd been noticing indigo children beginning to be born in an influx in the 1960s. And then it was further developed by Lee Carroll and Jan Tober in their books. But the reason that I'm speaking of this is because lately there's been, because of this autism boom and because of this ADHD boom and ADD boom, and the discovery of HSP through, I'll come back to her name, but I'm wondering what your opinion is surrounding that.
What is
That there's
HSP? You
this,
should define that.
well, I'm definitely a highly sensitive person, right? And so are my children. And I don't like labels, but that's the closest that I could come to explaining. And of course, all the traits, we don't resonate with all the traits, but being a highly sensitive individual comes with its own perks, but also its own trade-offs, especially within having to deal with society, the way that it's structured, because it's not structured for us. So my question to you was, how do you feel about the pseudoscience, so to speak, the spiritual nature of that versus the psychological take on that and the labeling through psychology? I do feel that there's like not a defining line between both. I think that they all kind of bleed into each other.
I definitely don't feel like drugging the young kids is the way to go. Like, just because a kid, whether it's ADHD, whatever, just because a kid can't sit in a desk, I'm like, you fucking drug the kid up. I'm like, that's definitely not an answer. But just because you're not fitting into this mold, but
Precisely.
so you're what? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people are definitely like have different, what's the word, like,
I guess,
levels of
yeah.
stuff. Like, you know, like people like just like even pain and pleasure. Like some people can't feel pain or pleasure that much. So you have to get kicked in the balls to even feel anything, or you got to step on them with a heel to like even feel something. So I'm like, so why can't
Yeah.
that happen with like, you know, like other stuff in us? You know, it's all like, you know, if we're like in a video game, like, you know, you have like attributes and stuff, and like people have like a higher points in this and like lower in this, and like,
Yes.
so I feel like that can happen like all over your body, like
Oh, of course.
physically, mentally,
right.
emotionally, energetically.
We're all made of the same ingredients, but at different percentages
Yeah,
of the
'cause
same stuff.
we live in such a mono culture world, to our food, to like how we want our people to be, and like our, our school system wants us to be like, it's all factory training. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember someone bringing it.
Rockefeller made.
This is a lady. I'd have to find her name, but she was talking about public schooling and because I never thought about this specific aspect of bells and how that's like very Pavlovian, and like you hear a bell, like gotta go here, and like you got like 5
So we
minutes.
couldn't
It's like
stand
this is your lunch
alarms.
break, and
Mm-hmm.
like so yeah. I mean, and the whole
It's a
thing's for
working.
factory
It's a worker
workers,
bell.
but
Yeah, yeah. It was to create good factory workers out of uneducated rural people.
it's like, what are the odds that your schooling needs to be the exact same amount of hours as a working shift? It's like, wow,
Yes.
like that's the most ideal way to learn. I'm like,
So I think one does bleed into the other, and I do feel that the extremism of psychology and the pseudoscience of metaphysical or spiritual fields. I just feel like it's this big spectrum from one end of an extreme to another, and I feel like a lot of it is also environmental that these things are showing up, and then also I'd like to bring in, there's a lot of factors at play, but I'd like to bring in this hysteria, this mass hysteria that happens with infectious thought and infectious behavior. And I feel like a lot of children, because of the birth of social media, mental contagions, and it happens. You can see it. These flares, like 80 years ago, it was DID, which wasn't known as DID. It was multiple personality disorder. There was one case. That's the, oh, geez, it's out the window. But basically, it's multiple personality. It's a dissociative identity disorder. All these acronyms. But about 80 years ago, I believe there was a case. It was released to the public, and then all of a sudden you saw this spike in cases. So
it was like the anorexia, bulimia, like they came in like waves, and like people like you hear one,
eating
and then
disorders,
it's like,
the same thing.
Yeah, it's like
the same thing. So also I feel
what
that
are you
it's
referencing
environmental.
today?
Right, it's also environmental because back in the 60s we did start using certain chemicals and pesticides, things like that, introducing things like that into the environment that weren't in the environment before.
Yeah,
I feel like that plays a big factor.
Ever
too.
since, and I've heard this on so many different things, but like ever since like those bombs were dropped in the 40s, like things got weird. Like UFO sightings went up, and there's so many like angles you come from that, whether their physical thing is coming to check on us or
right.
just
So I'm wanting to know what
all
your
these, like,
opinion is.
And every chart you look at, I mean, obviously correlation doesn't mean causation, but like there's so many things like 50s and on, like these charts of like just all these health issues stuff just going up, and it's just becoming normal. Like Down syndrome is way more common, and like autism, like just health, all this health shit. Just there's so many things at play. But like honestly, I think after that time, things just got really weird and really we took a weird turn, and like we went into a different like a side reality, and like we're like, this is a little weird now, but.
Yeah, there definitely was a dimensional kind of side.
A shift,
a shift. But I think also it had to do
Mandela type lateral movement
with many of our women in the country working in factories for the war and exposed to chemicals and radiation and things and then the men came home and they became pregnant and gave birth to boomers and gave birth to.
Oh, I think I meant like pregnant men. I was like that whole fucking argument.
Well, I think there had something.
Dude,
that had something to do with it as well, and then all of this kind of craziness was ensued after that.
I just saw this video of like they were testing some, I think it was an atomic bomb, and it was like when they were doing like it'd be underwater and there's just this fucking gigantic explosion, and they were testing what it did to the ships around it, and then there's all these guys. I think they went there afterwards, but all these guys they were like, I guess just mop it up, start mopping the boats and shit, but their Geiger meters weren't going off, so they thought it was safe, but they weren't testing like plutonium or something, and they said they pulled it pulled out a fish from the ocean, and it was so irradiated with plutonium, I think it was plutonium, that it was like flopping around, and it took its own X-ray. That's called like a self.
Right, I remember that. Yeah.
I can't remember I'll put it right here. But there's a term for it and there's the picture of the X-ray, but it's like weird. But it was so fucking contaminated that. Yeah. And those people were just fucking mopping, and they went home and had kids, and who knows what that does to our cellular DNA and stuff.
Yes. So there's all these factors at play, but
Yeah.
I do feel that nowadays, of course, there are real and very, very real and acute um, mental disorders, right? But I do feel that this whole spectrum has gotten way out of hand, and also the conventional foods and the lack of a really rich microbiome in the gut for kids nowadays, plus
Yeah.
social media contamination as well, especially with, the other movements that are happening that are really mutilating our children's bodies and minds.
Would you say it's purposeful, or is this purely
Agenda-driven?
coincidental? Yes, I'm sure there's some things that aren't, but I mean, I mean,
There's people who are
how,
making money off of it, and if they
yeah,
find a way to make money off of it, then it will be written into law, and then they'll be protected, and then they get to push.
like a petroleum company would sure try to, you got all this waste, so let's try to resell it and package it nice, and just so many things like that of just
AKA
social media. I mean, like they're designed, phones
Yeah.
are designed to be used, so they're designed to hook our
Mhm.
attention and get us addicted to them. So it's like, and who knows all these other that the food is addicting and
Yeah.
it doesn't nourish you, and it's like you're hungry 30 minutes, empty calories,
Well,
and
it's very challenging with
like,
having teenagers in this day and age. I have two daughters that I won't say have been untouched by that contagion.
yeah,
They,
it's impossible.
but I knew it was a phase, and just to let them phase out of their experience with themselves, but to give them ample knowledge and love and kind of space to play with that. But even the girls weren't untouchable
I know,
with
because
it.
when I think about my diet when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, like how many fucking frozen TV dinners I ate, like how many, I don't know, honestly, I don't know when the first organic food I ate was in my life. Who know? And I can tell
Really?
I could tell that's why like I'm like, I feel like that's why I'm so light bone. It's also like an Asian thing, but like I feel like my bones are light, like I'm like bird bone, but I've never broken a bone in my life though, but I just feel like and when I see certain kids that are like my niece, certain kids that are just, like they look gray. Like you're not
I've called them
exuberant.
the Greys.
You don't
Yeah,
you
it's really
don't
disturbing.
exude
Gray
like light
people.
and energy, and it's just
Mhm. Mhm.
then you see her diet, and she came over and brought like graham crackers, pizza,
All wheat
and like
products.
chips, or yeah, and it was all like the same. It was all the same. It was just
And a
wheat, the same
Caesar,
thing.
Little Caesar's pizza.
Yeah, and it was all
And
like I remember you're like
it's all variations of the
yeah.
same food. Yeah, and that
She had an aversion to eating anything
a lot
not.
of that happens, believe this, a lot of that happens because of formula-fed babies.
Yeah,
So they
get
all,
them
it's
young as you
really
can.
interesting. I kind of did a study like this with my friends' children and noticing that the kids that only wanted to eat cups of mac and cheese and only wanted to
Mhm.
eat bread and were just like stuck on this grain
Yeah.
addiction, they were all formula fed. And so just paying attention to that.
Dude, another thing, I remember hearing this about kids eating I think it starts young, but kids eating like mush, like just mushy food. Like
Yeah.
that, it correlates to like we get weak jaws, and then that's what
Mhm.
makes all our teeth crooked. And like
Mhm.
just starting young, you don't use it, and so your teeth just, I don't know, like you're not developing anything. And like I remember
Right.
thinking that was interesting, but obviously it's dangerous for a kid to eat like a raw carrot or something. But if you just,
No,
uh,
but you can give them it's something dried and hard. It's again a grain, but I remember my mom used to give us these big dried toast rectangles. I can't
like
recall
a
the name of
crouton.
them right now, but it's like a giant crouton,
Mm.
and we would
Oh, so
teeth
yeah.
on those,
Oh.
and then they would dissolve, so it was pretty safe.
No.
You couldn't chew, like bite off big bits because we didn't have many teeth. So.
Do they make teething rings and stuff for humans? I know they do for like puppies and shit, but is that I guess is that a thing? Like,
Yeah, yeah, and you can freeze them, and
mm.
they're made out of silicone and various other man-made materials. Yay!
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but
no,
that whole
it's not doom and
that
gloom.
whole saying of trying to be a healthy fish in a polluted river. That's what it feels like. Because like everywhere you go, there's like chemicals. There's like bad shit. There's like just
Yes.
like when you go to a store, like the health, even stuff in the health section isn't healthy, but like how there's like one tiny section that says healthy, health foods, and then like then like what the hell is the rest of the store? It's like it's mind boggling almost.
Yes, I do notice that whenever I start eating too much conventional goodies, I freaking love pizza, you guys. Okay, and though I love to make my own pizza, sometimes you just want a pizza and to lay in bed and watch a movie with pizza. Like, okay, I'm not saying that I don't have those moments too, right?
Yeah,
But whenever that's the
standard.
standard, yeah, I just get kind of concerned for everyone. So I'm not being doom and gloom. I'm just like I wanted your
Yeah, I
opinion,
agree.
and then also just to bring some conversation to the public to get opinion and perspective. But these are just things that I notice and things that I really care about and I'm
Yeah,
concerned about with people because
yeah.
of the evolution that's taking place globally. We are ushering into this new earth. Things are changing. The old paradigm and way of being and living and learning and is shifting, and it's really beautiful to be of witness, to be a watcher in all of it. But
I hope so, but all I see is obesity rates rising and stuff. So it's like like the evolution chart of like of man, and it like goes, and then the next guy's like a fat guy, and like I don't know. It's like I hope so, but it feels like the ones that are like that are it's more meaningful, and then like the ones, and there might be it's
mm,
not it's I don't know if it's going to be a majority type of thing. So I don't know like
yeah.
how that
Have you
happens, but
noticed another thing I've been noticing is all of the revealing that's happening with the water, all the receding waters, and revealing um, ancient towns and civilizations and strange formations under the water, strange shapes, like almost like what would you call that? Like gygometric shapes, like a soundboard almost underneath a dried lake, where it looks like a grid, and it's been like created by sound, kind of like sacred geometry.
well,
And then I would love to speak to the Eye of the Sahara that you shared with me, because new Lemuria has been a huge message for me lately, that we're heading into new Lemuria. Um,
speaking on the water, I always thought people say like ocean levels are rising, but I have heard people, like Graham Hancock does. He's like a certified crazy scuba diver because he was
mm-hmm.
crazy interested in like off the coast of stuff, and like trying to find structures, like stuff that looks like stairs or like a lot of like square things and stuff. But you're talking about receding water. I remember in the summer when I think it's Lake Mead in Nevada, like that the
Mm-hmm.
lake like totally dried up, and they
Yeah.
found like so many dead bodies in there from like
Yeah.
just outside of Vegas, the mafia. There's like bodies and barrels and stuff in there. It's like just old guns and shit. People just dumping bodies in
Histories,
there, but
mysteries.
so like yeah, but yeah, I don't know too much about the eye of this. I can't remember the name. It's like starts with an R. I'll put it right here, but there
Mm-hmm.
it's yeah, it's like this natural formation. And people say it's like some magma of natural formation and stuff. But I mean, when you hear depictions of Atlantis like that, it talks
Yes.
about concentric circles and water, and it's in the middle of the
And
desert,
it
and
looks
there's
just
all
like it.
this salt left over there,
Yeah.
and like,
And some
um,
images that I noticed of it almost looked like a blue, watery, turquoise electricity coming out of the center, and then spreading to the concentric circles outwardly. And of course, that's probably doctored and enhanced, but I mean, I just kept seeing this blue electricity in that eye.
yeah, I heard some guy talking about it is how because it's so hard to study there because it's like in the middle of nowhere, and there's like no transportation, no like not foundation,
Mm-hmm.
just nowhere to like how to even get there and like how to like
Yeah.
camp and stuff. It's like very very remote, but it's very interesting.
I read that they were drowned because they had taken that the mythology is that they had taken the knowledge of the gods without permission, and so they were flooded and sunk because they were using technologies that weren't meant for them, that they didn't have permission to use.
Permission. Wow.
A lot of readers and channelers are speaking to this new technology that's rising this year and coming back into the world, that we're all rediscovering ancient technologies that are going to replace this old paradigm of mechanisms and constructs of time and machinery that we have now through sound and water and all of these ancient knowledges and wisdoms.
Well, I've heard people talking about these like UFO sightings and stuff that, you know, once the government acknowledged it, that's when I was like, I don't really believe them anymore. But you know, this technology, because like I remember one where there's like no heat signatures on them, like they suspect that they moved through like and what is that guy, Stephen Greer? He like worked at Area 51. He talks about like it's like a gravity propulsion bending kind of thing instead of like, you know, a rocket being pushed, which is very rudimentary. Like put a lot of fuel and just push it versus like something that like sucks in gravity or space time and moves and stuff. But
Yeah.
I don't know, like, you know, but yeah, when you see certain ancient structures and like we struggle to make it today, so it's like there's definitely like lost technology and stuff like that. But I remember, I think he died, but there was this old guy in Florida who claims that he knew how the Egyptians and Stonehenge were built, and he said it was like through sound. But and he had I'll try to put pictures up, but there's like it wasn't like a Disney World, but he had like you could go visit these things that he said he built all by himself, and like when you look at it, it's like kind of like, wow, like how did this old frail man do this? But he claims it's just from old technology.
Yeah, so De Stefano, that's what he was speaking on in the interview with Aubrey.
I understand. And when I hear De Stefano, I keep thinking of the comedian Chris De Stefano. So I'm trying to think of this guy being all like serious, but
it's Matias, and
he's all New Yorker guy.
Yeah, he's a really, really beautiful human from what I've seen so far. But go check him out on the. I've seen him on a few different people's podcasts, but the interview with Aubrey Marcus, I'm only halfway through, but it's pretty fascinating what he has to say. I've saved a couple of other videos of his too, how to tap into and live your highest purpose.
Do you have
in
any?
This life.
We're over an hour, but do you have any final? Just trying to circle back to like, you know, our psychic. I don't even like that word because it's got so much dogma behind it, but just stigma behind it. But you know, just for people to how to increase your own, a bit, you know, supernatural abilities. Which supernatural in itself sounds like. It sounds great. It's like natural and it's super, but
it's our innate abilities that have been trained out of us through an indoctrination, just like a re-education. So I wanted to
just do little experiments in your life, like, you know, like we did with the card stuff, like just
Right.
try it, like just see, you know.
But when it comes to just honing basic intuition, you know, your gut feeling, your asking yourself, tapping into your higher self and your inner truth. Intuition is basically just following your personal truth, whatever rings true to you. If it feels like truth and you feel really calm and resonant and follow that thread. If you feel excited by it, but it's not, you know, an imbalanced excitement, but it actually turns you up, it turns you on. That's following your intuition. I like to ask yes or no questions too, just to hone it, just to hone. Does this feel like truth in my body? Does this not feel like truth in my body? So I think...
Can I tell you one time?
Yeah.
I specifically remember one of the few times I remember going against my gut feeling, and it ended disastrously. Like,
yes.
This was when I was like living in my car, sorta. It was in Taos, and I was with this girl. And I didn't know this prior, but, you know, going in, she was like, hey, can I, you know, we're like hanging out, and she was like, hey, can I borrow $300? Like, I need to go, I don't remember what her story was, but she's like, I need to get, I think she told me she was going to like get some shrooms or weed and sell it and like make $600, and she was going to give me my $300 back like immediately. And I remember thinking, I was like, I don't know, man. I remember, I think I was like with her in her car. Yes. So I was like, I guess. And then she pulled in this like, you know, shady little apartment there and gave her $300. And, you know, then she's like, all right, I'll come back later. And then I remember I was like, all right. So I was walking in like the main town, little center area. and it started snowing, and I was like, oh shit, I gotta go in this coffee shop. And then she called me later and to pick her up, and she was, I don't even know how the fuck she was driving. It was, you picked me up, she was just like nodding out and just like just, and I was like, and then turned out she was just used the 300 just to buy heroin and do it. And I was just like, and I was like, where's my money at? And she's like, man, just it was gone.
It's
And
gone.
but I remember the whole time going into it, I was like, I don't know about this, man. And then I was being nice. I think I was kind of like in a, I was like in her with her, so I was just like, okay, whatever. And then I was like, it just ended
You betrayed your
disastrously.
own boundaries.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, you betrayed your own boundaries in that.
Well, but it was a good. I'm glad I did. Sure, it cost me
Mm.
$300, but it was a great muscle memory, intuition memory, learning thing where I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
when I had that feeling, don't ignore that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's a very good point.
That was my takeaway.
Yeah, don't
just from a
ignore the
learning experience.
confirmations either. Follow the breadcrumbs and the confirmations in life. So whatever feels affirming, it feels really good to you to do, feels really good for you to follow, don't question it. Just go with it. If it's not harmful, if it's something creative, if it's something that resonates with you deeply, and it doesn't matter what it is, if it's anything creative, anything that lights you up. Right now is definitely the time to tap into that, because there's a bigger energy that's coming in the spring, because we are ushering out of Saturn, and that ruling, kind of controlling, central domination sort of energy into eruptive, explosive, fast Uranus, which is Aquarian energy. We're in this Aquarian age again for the next 20 years. And so it's very highly intellectual, very heady, very cosmic, very, galactic connection, very intuitive and rational and logical. But if we take all of that energy and we add heart, and remember to add heart to that, we're going to find this harmony in this year and all of these beautiful, delicious alignments coming. So right now would be the time to start just looking into what your innate gifts are, I would say, as far as psychic ability, and what your extrasensorial heightened awareness is, where that is, and just devouring any material that calls to you, and
Heed the call.
heed the call.
Yeah, it's like, if not now, then when? If you got something you've been wanting to do for a while, or you just like I don't really have time, or don't want to put the energy for, like, just starting this podcast is like so much like small things that go into it, and like, but it's worth doing, and like, we'll get better as we do it. I feel like you guys tell us, I feel like this was each time we do it, it gets better. Like, honestly, putting out episode 0 versus like after we did the first and then this one, each time I feel like it's like better. So like, who know, obviously there'll be some stinkers, but I feel like, I don't know, I feel like we get better each time already, like, let alone like episode 50 or 100.
I think, yeah, the natural progression, we are just destined towards getting better because we're putting in the work and we're putting in the focus. And
Right.
yeah.
It's a good.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like it's a good time to wrap up. It's dark out now. I gotta lock the birds out and put the turkey up. But dude, like last night we saw this. I pulled in and my headlights saw this possum just run across the yard, and then so I went in to investigate, and he was like on the fence right next to our coop, and then so I was like, I just tried to like spook him. So I was like, I had like a log on the like a stick, a pretty thick stick, and I was just chunking it at him, and then like and he was like, then you climbed the tree, and I was throwing more stuff at him, and then I was like, oh shit, I'm like, I'm so good, I think I killed him, because he was just hanging in the branches like this, and I was like, damn dude, I killed him. And then like we see him breathing, and I'm like, oh yeah, he's fucking playing dead. And then I had to get a stick and poke him, and he like fell out, but came back alive. But it was interesting to see. But all right, anything you want to?
Any closing words? I wanted to plug, speaking of avenues of abilities and channeling and calling for intuitive answers and such, this was a gift from me, from an old dear sister friend of mine. from Taylor Ellis. He's the artist who created our
Big T.
Big T. He created our logo for the last two businesses, actually. But the art is exceptional, and go give him a look. He has ebooks and all sorts of beautiful grand things of offerings for you guys. Thank you for tuning in and tuning up.
You said that earlier.
Yeah, Fringe family. I really appreciate you.
Love from the Fringe people.
Thank you for
Love you.
joining us. Love from the Fringe.